call this work session to order. If we could start with introductions, Mr. Dyson.
Fred Dyson.
Thank you. Forrest Dunbar.
Pete Peterson.
Austin Davidson.
Christopher Monstead. Felix Rivera.
Suzanne LaFrance. Amy DeBaldi.
John Middleton. Eric Croft.
And on the phone?
Dave Crenny.
Okay, great. All right, so you should all have a binder with the different proposed amendments. Desiree is here, that's Camacho, but I think that I would prefer that everyone explain their own amendment, talk about it a little bit. One thing is whether or not you actually propose to put it forward or not, and I'll get a sense of that. And then we'll have, we have 3 hours. We have time to discuss each amendment, and we have time to hear from, if they're present, from members of the administration, what kind of impact this would have on their particular program. And I guess if there's somebody from the relevant department that wants to raise their hand when we talk about this, I'll try to have time to call on folks. We don't have public testimony because it's just a work session, but we do have 3 hours, so hopefully we can get through all of these. So I have them in a preliminary order. They're not numbered. They're not numbered by Dunbar Amendment 1, Dunbar Amendment 2. Instead, they're just numbered in direct order. So we'll start with Amendment 1, which is an amendment by Mr. Trainey. Mr. Trainey, would you like to explain this amendment, please?
This one's pretty self-sufficient. I do not intend to cut fire protection of any kind to acres. This last week, because of my injury, I've been able to watch a lot more TV than anybody should be allowed to watch. So what much you went to California, they've had massive fires. Right now, they've got 63 dead and 600 still missing. We don't have the same wind conditions, but when you look at the hillside, that area is ripe for fire. There is no fire hydrants up there. There's dead palms, the spruce bark beetle kill up there. What I do not want to see is what's happening down there in California happening here. So I'm opposed to any control of any choice matter or form of fire department. What I've tried to do is cut where I can, add money back into the fire department.
Thank you. So let's see. Is there anyone here from either the fire department or the library who would like to comment on this? Could you come forward and identify yourself for the record?
Jody Hedrick, Fire Chief, and I know that there are several in regards to us, so I don't really have any comment for Mr. Trainey.
Okay. Would you want to maybe sit up front here for a little bit, because the first sort of tranche of amendments are all fire department related. Is there anyone here from the library that could describe what a $2.4 million reduction in the library budget would look like?
Chris Schutte, Director of Office of Economic and Community Development. We just got this number today, so we don't have a detailed answer to it. Short answer is you're looking at losing not only the majority of the days of blue staff, but probably both branches as well.
What is the total? Does anyone have the total budget for the? I'm sure it's in our. Well, we can weigh on that, but if someone could give me the total budget for the library, I'd be curious what percent of their budget is being cut by this amendment.
The total is $14 million.
14 million. Okay.
15%.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Schutte. Is there any other comments or questions for Mr. Trainey, Mr. Weddleton?
Maybe it's a good time. We have a bunch on fire, but have Chief Hedrick talk about what are the impacts of cutting the tender and cutting the battery drive. And then we heard that there's kind of reconfiguration department overall. That's my impression. We do more EMTs, so we hope we just flesh out what is the impact. We hear sucking at hydrogen burn and wildfire and cut that wall. Is that true? For example,
Through Chair Dunbar. So the effects are our proposal, looking at our staffing and being able to deliver services to the community. Our proposal was to cut 10 to 14, which serves stuff big in Heights, and truck 12, which serves the south side of Anchorage. By cutting those, it will increase response times. I would like to correct, yes, the majority of what we do, 68% of the calls that we go on are calls, that means that we need more EMS assets to go to the other calls, because our call volume is increasing. By reducing those two apparatus, it reduces time that we will have any employees getting to scene, because if, even for an EMS call, we'll send a truck company if they are the closest resource to go. So it extends, basically extends response times anywhere from 5 to 8 minutes to those areas, because the assets will have to come from different places. For tender 14, I agree that it does leave Stuckagon Heights without a water resource. However, the small population in Stuckagon Heights, and we looked at the call volume, previous calls, we looked at previous fires. One, they don't have a lot of fires up in that area, and there is a smaller population to that area. So risk potential and actual use of Stuckagon, or the tender in Stuckagon Heights, kind of contributed to why we picked that unit instead of taking tender 9 out of service. It really comes down to, for us, it was the potential of where we're going to have fires, where the tenders would be needed. The potential of fire on the hillside is higher. They already have more structure fires, they have older housing, the population is higher, and risk potential there is just as, it's probably more risky than Stuckagon Heights. Not saying the Stuckagon Heights area isn't a high potential, or it isn't a necessary that we're writing them off. What I'm saying is the potential due to the population, the aging of the housing, and our past experience for what we've seen in that area, it has less potential to have a fire. The wildland conditions, we do have concern about that, but I think that's a different conversation to be had of what we do in preparation for wildland, because one, it's weather dependent, and as we saw last year, we had very few wildland fires anywhere within Alaska, let alone in the core area. We don't know what the weather's going to do, so I think that gives us a difference. We are looking at a bit of a restructure, but that was to give us more assets to manage our EMS operation and have more EMS transport capability. We still need all of the fire apparatus that we have.
Can I follow up?
Yeah, and then Mr. Cranston, I actually I have a question, then we'll go to you, Mr. Cranston, that's okay. Go ahead, John. Yeah, you can do a follow-up if it's on that same topic.
I guess one is the tender, you have suggestions. Is he fine with this?
14 segment times.
9 is DRN. We also have 8 and 10. 8 is O'Malley, 10 is.
So the suggestion is don't cut 14, cut 9, but 9 is only partially staffed. So we
No,
don't
it's
have
fully
any-
staffed.
Which is the one now? Like a roll?
We don't, so last year, to make sure that we did budget last year, we took 10 to 9 out of service if it cost overtime. So we did that for part of the winter last year. I think we started that August, maybe mid-July to August last year, and that was to reduce overtime to make sure that we met budget.
But in the current budget time.
It's fully staffed.
Thank you, Mr. Wilton. So I want to follow up on that. So you just said there's one tender in East Anchorage and for Stuckagon, tender 14. And there are 3 tenders in South Anchorage, O'Malley, Rabbit Creek, and DeArmond. So logically, wouldn't you cut one of the 3? I mean, don't they support each other rather than the only one that supports East Anchorage? Isn't it also the case that the tender 14 can be used in structure fires in the trailer parks we have in East Anchorage, where we've had a lot of structure fires?
It is, but typically a tender will carry 3,000 to 3,500 gallons worth of water. A typical structure fire doesn't take that much water. 750 gallons to 1,000 gallons we carry on the engines would manage, should be enough to put out a structure fire in a trailer house, because they're a smaller structure, and by the time we get there, they're usually fully engulfed. So it takes a lot of water, but it doesn't, 1,000 gallons, you can do a lot with 1,000 gallons of water. It is a backup. We do send a tender just in case it gets out of control or spreads to another trailer, back to preventing the entire trailer park from going.
But it is the case we have 3 tenders in South Anchorage and 1 tender in East Anchorage, yes?
That is correct.
Thank you. Okay,
I
so
would like to correct the backup tender for Station 14 would be the O'Malley.
not DeArmond?
Not DeArmond. No,
Okay.
that would take a lot longer to get there. It's actually the O'Malley Station, which is 6.7 miles away. It takes about 12 minutes to get to that area. So it would add an additional 12 minutes to get that tender on location, and traffic in that area is much better than going completely through downtown. So I just wanted to correct that it's not the ER, it wouldn't be Station 9, it's the backup. It would be Station 8 on O'Malley.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Two questions, actually, for the chief. So the savings would primarily come from the reduction of 12 headcount through attrition, and that would bring us down to 382. So the first part of my question is, for a city this size and this many structures or acreage, what is the number, at least have a target number of personnel? What's the target number for personnel for AFD? And also, with a shift towards EMS, if you did hire more EMS practices, would some of those 12 who are on the tender and truck, would they be shifted over to those other vehicles?
I'll answer your last part of your question first. No, they would not. We still need that staffing for the apparatus. If those apparatus are taken out of service, those bodies would be used to fill vacancies on other apparatus, not on ambulances. Other than firefighters, we would use them, but they would mostly go to fill overtime or any other cost of, any other vacancies that we have with the other tenders, with the trucks, or with the engines. It's kind of hard to really put a fine number on it. However, compared to other communities of our size, we're understaffed, both operations and definitely administratively. Our number should be much closer to 420 to 440 instead of 380 to 390.
Thank you. Let's go on to.
Just real quick, I don't know if I heard this, I've been a little distracted, I'm sorry. So I heard the description of a tender can do a lot, has a lot of water, but the scenario that kind of boggles my mind is that kind of doomsday scenario, what happened up on Potter Islands as the fire was coming from McHugh. If that had happened in an urban area, what would that scenario be like?
If the McHugh Creek fire would have been 4 miles over in the middle of Potter Marsh or somewhere along those areas, we would have seen something similar to, not quite what they're experiencing in California with this fire, but with the previous fire that happened earlier this year. We would have a mass evacuation, and we would, it's now that it's not in the wildland side of things, it's much more within the urban interface. We would do a lot more structure firefighting. Obviously, forestry shows up to assist, but we still, all of our crews would be participating in structural firefighting. Due to the closeness of the houses, the brush and just wildland issues that we have up there, because everybody likes to have trees right next to their house, it would be a serious problem.
And so, just a quick follow-up, from the kind of fire risk perspective, not the EMS, but fire risk perspective, what are the highest fire risk areas in town?
If we're talking wildland, the hillside, because of the population base, the age of the houses, and the coverage, and the lack of water for the entire hillside, is probably our highest priority when it comes to wildland. If we are talking, it's the east side of Anchorage, if we're talking structural.
But in those, then I would assume that there are tons of pieces of equipment that can respond in an urban setting. There are a few tenders that can be hauling water up.
Yeah, that's our problem with the hillside, is the fact that we would, if we have a major structure fire or a wildland fire gets out of control on the hillside, because of the road system and the distance and the lack of free water supplies up there, it would take all 3 tenders, and we would probably bring in the 4th tender from either Eagle River, or if 14 is staffed, we would basically, it would be all hands for water supply to support that fire. So we would need everything.
You have one running, and then you have one running down to fill up. When you come back and
One
switch,
dumping, yeah, they
back
basically,
forth.
and the tenders don't, it's not like they're doing 60 down the road.
Right.
They're with vehicles of that size, depending on traffic conditions, anywhere from, we don't expect them to go 45 to 50.
Water 9,000 gallons. So,
Thank you, Mr. Crock. Well, actually, we have to pause right now. We're going to go out of order for a bit. Chief Dahl is here to speak to one of our amendments, and I've been informed he has to leave, and so we want to switch to that amendment, discuss it, so that he can get back to work. Do you know what number? Oh no, what number amendment is it? It's Mr. Dyson's number 18. 8. Amendment number 8, and then we will resume with. Wait, no. Oh, yeah. 8. Okay. So Amendment 8, I guess we'll go to you, Mr. Dyson, first and let you explain it. The specific portion that the chief is going to speak about is the rape kits and perhaps the surveillance camera, but definitely the rape kits. Well, Mr. Dyson, do you want to introduce this amendment first or explain it?
Yeah. Chief Dahl and I had a conversation about this backlog on the rape kits a couple, 3 weeks ago, and he had said that he was very interested in the city having the capacity to handle and do those in a very timely fashion. And I asked him how much, and what I remember I got back was the equipment around $300,000, and then staffing for them, 2 positions, and so on. Subsequent to that, it was in the press that the state is getting 1.5 or 1.3 federal dollars to enhance our capacity. Did I get that right? Something like that?
I don't remember the exact amount, but I know that they do have a grant to process those kits.
Yeah. So my intention was that we have that capacity for ourselves, because there's a huge backlog, and it's taken months to practically get those processed, send them out, and come back. So I was started down this road, but as I said in my cover letter, what I want is for the administration to have some bargaining to go with the state, and literally say to the state, if you're going to do this, how about us less using the equipment, for a shift every day or whatever, to have the capacity for us to process the priority kits for us. So all of our goal is the same, but it just defies logic that the state and the city can't work very close to accomplish both of our priorities. So I just told you more than I know.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. So, Chief Dahl, do you have anything to say about this amendment?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess I would start by saying that APD does have an interest in having its own capacity to do DNA testing at some point. But frankly, we're just not in a position to really begin doing that now. And the main reason is space, right? We're working through moving the agency to the downtown location. We're going to have a bond in April to renovate the Elmore facility. Part of that renovation is to update the crime lab that we do have there that does things like latent fingerprint examination and some other forensic testing to create space that ultimately, if we did have the opportunity to begin doing our own DNA testing, we'd have that space built there. Obviously, for DNA testing, there's a lot of requirements for the physical space, as far as keeping it clean, very scientific, clean rooms, that kind of stuff, which I will not even pretend to understand all the ins and outs of. So effectively, we don't really have a place to begin doing that now. I will tell you that I don't believe that the state crime lab actually does its own DNA testing. I think they send everything out to an outside lab. I could be mistaken about that. And I believe that's what they're doing with the sex assault kits. Mr. Dyson is correct. They do have a grant to do some of that testing. Deputy Chief McCoy and Captain Nolder have been working really hard on sort of organizing that with the state. We have a pathway laid out to get through the entire backlog that we have remaining. It's about 17 or 1,800 sex assault kits that remain to be testing. We're going to be submitting them about 100 a month, is that right? So it'll take us about 18 months to work through that backlog, submitting about 100 a month to the state lab to be tested. All new incoming sex assault kits automatically get sent to the crime lab at this point. So this backlog are the kits that, for whatever reason, the prosecutorial team and the investigators determined at the time they were collected that they weren't evidentiary in nature, so they weren't needed for the prosecution. But there's obviously some advantages to having them in CODIS, the DNA database, for any kind of future offense by that person. So I'm not sure if I covered everything you guys wanted to hear, but I'm of course always happy to answer questions.
So, Chief, I guess two questions. So you said you're submitting 100 a month, and that'll happen regardless of whether you give us additional funding or not, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then second, there is a talk here about surveillance cameras, and Mr. Dyson mentions your name. Would you be involved in that? Do you recommend that we spend $145,000 on surveillance cameras?
Well, I saw that, and we did talk about surveillance cameras at one point. I'm not exactly sure what that is directed towards. My understanding is that some of the new street lighting that's been installed in the municipality, the LEDs, kind of smart street lighting, has the capacity to add different modules, and then security cameras could be one of those. From just a general law enforcement perspective, we do solve a lot of crimes by the use of surveillance cameras all over town already. Stuff that the government owns, and then private citizens who are willing to share that with law enforcement, or we obtain through a search warrant. So it is an effective law enforcement tool. I'm not sure. I haven't looked at it from the perspective of our agency sort of implementing that, so I'm not even sure what $145,000 would get us. But
Yep. Thank you, Chief Dahl. Mr. Dyson?
So this was, well, what I envisioned would happen is we would start incrementally, the police with their data on where crime's happening, and the community councils, and local businesses going through some process of where would be the very best place to put them. And as I remember our conversation, the really good high-resolution ones where you can read license plates and get a good ID are $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a piece, something in that regard. So in my dreaming at night, I had Chris Constant working with the community councils and the police and local business people in the areas that we know are high crime, in which the chief and his people would say, boy, it would be really good to have one here. We do it one or two at a time. We're not committing all that money. And I'm hoping no matter what you all do with my amendment here, is that we get started on a pilot basis, and see if Chris, with his charm and strategic vision here, could work out a process. And so between now and the first quarter budget revisions and so on, we can say, hey, we spent $15,000 and this is what's happening and it's working. And Chief Dahl's and I's conversation, he said the dispatch center, wherever you look at all those cameras, can handle more. Am I understanding?
I don't recall that conversation specifically, but I will tell you that one of the places that we're most pressed right now as far as workload goes is the dispatch center. So we have the capacity to have more staff actually sitting in the dispatch center. But to be frank, right now, adding any new workload to them would be a challenge. I mean, we're barely keeping up with 911 a lot of the time. So.
And just to follow up, if I may, when Austin and Pete and I were at the emergency center over here on 1305 East Street, they have a complete small-scale replica of the dispatch center with all the equipment and stuff there, and totally unused. I mean, that stuff, scores of computers and all kinds of things with nothing going on. I mean, it's dead space, and so that's kind of space would be available, and there might even be room for a lab there, but it's, yeah, so, but if you had the space and staff, it requires you to do nothing more to have more cameras being monitored. Is that correct?
Well, if we had staff to actually monitor cameras, I'm certain that that's something that could be piped into a dispatch center. It would just be, to be honest, it's not so much the live monitoring that typically matters to us. It's the ability to go back and say, okay, something bad happened here. Let's figure out who did it. And so we know it happened in this time frame. Pull video from that time, take a look at it. I mean, that's what we do. Frankly, almost every day, all across the city, in our partnerships with local businesses and residents. And I would just throw out there that, so we do have an alternate dispatch location at the Emergency Operations Center there. I wouldn't go so far as to say that it's unused. It is not staffed every day. That's our backup location. If something really bad happens at Elmore, we can dislocate to that location and stand up a full emergency dispatch center, 911 answering point, all those kinds of things. We use it periodically to do maintenance on the Elmore one. So if we have to do maintenance at Elmore for some reason, we purposely relocate, dispatch a 911 to the EOC, and they sit there for a while. They recently were there for about 6 months while we did the remodel of Elmore. So it does serve a useful purpose. It's just, but you're right, it's not staffed every day.
Thank you. So we're going to have to pick up the pace a little bit so we can start getting through these. I think there's one other question with Mr. Constant, Mr. Weddleton, and then I want to let the chief go.
Yeah, well, surveillance is a very tricky issue with police. I think that the one team that is sensible to provide in a test basis would be the CAP team, and the problem-oriented, where they can set solutions up for specific problems in specific areas, as opposed to the idea of setting up a broad network of surveillance cameras to just capture stuff that we could move in and out of at will over time, because the civil libertarian in me says we need to be very careful with that. But the CAP team is very focused on mission-specific duty and has proven very good success with cameras in the past. And so I would ask, would any proposal for surveillance be narrowly construed in such a way that it meets the mission but doesn't violate people, broadly?
Mr. Weddleton?
So, Mr. Dyson, I read this as more capital projects, right? It's not operating money so much, right?
That's correct.
And what would the dome, you're talking about the dome?
Yes.
Okay, what would that $250,000 be for?
Well, the forensic analysis that was done, and I have a free copy of it here, in the recommendations for the future, it said when a dome collapsed, all the egress, all the emergency doors were closed off because the dome fabric came down and closed them out. So they recommended in each of those exits that there be a structure there that would hold that egress location open so people would get a chance to get out. And a portion of that was that the present light towers that are there be replaced with structural steel and some cable strung across it so it would hold the dome envelope up, giving people a chance. And the rupture there was a seam rupture, and it stripped out so quickly the whole thing came down in 7.5 seconds. Now the work that has been done, it's very unlikely that a weather-related event will ever cause a failure like that because we know so much more. But the fabric is getting older. The decision was made, it was inaccurate. Based on the strength of that, it's not going to fail without outside cause. But a fire inside, somebody going along with a knife and cutting a big slit that starts it to rupture can still do it. So the recommendation in the forensic analysis was that they structured over the door and then some cables strung to hold it up to give people a chance to get out of there. And so that's what that's about. Now the administration and I disagree on this, and they've been pretty rigorous about it and so on. But it's my view, and experts that did the analysis, that it's insufficient for a public accommodation facility. So I'm probably going to have a public safety committee with a meeting, and we'll go over this with it. And if you all don't believe that those recommendations are sufficient, then my recommendation is that we take some of this money and hire the best expert. It costs us a few $1,000s to give us another independent analysis to make that decision. So that's the totality of what I'm doing. But every one of these things I proposed, the surveillance cameras, whatever works out with the state and on the rape kits, and what we decide are all up in the air. But as the months go by, we'll know far more. So I see this as a placeholder while we work through all three of those items where we don't know the parameters now.
Is this something you could propose to go on the bond? Since it's all
I haven't.
Oh, hold on, Mr. Wilbur wants to insert.
Just to recognize that it's a privately owned facility, so we wouldn't be able to use bond funds to do it.
We do not. We neither own nor operate the dome.
Correct.
Do they pay property taxes?
Pardon me?
Do they pay property taxes?
Privately held, I would imagine they do.
I thought they were nonprofit.
Well, nonprofit.
Yeah.
Or it's just-
So we already subsidized them in that fashion. Yeah.
Just want to point out that what the proposal here does is takes public money from a public park that serves the public and gives it to a private interest and provides for them an asset. And it all comes from the downtown, which I think is badly unfair.
All right. Well, I'll thank you all for the discussion. We'll have more time to obviously debate this on Tuesday night, but I would like to move on to our next amendment. Thank you, Chief Dahl. Do you have anything else?
No, Mr. Chair, thank you very much for calling my statement.
Okay, thank you. Is Chief McCoy going to stay with us, or are you out of here too?
I can speak for a little bit.
I don't think there are any other amendments directly, aside from homelessness. I don't think there's anything that directly impacts the police department. So if you need to go fight crime, I prefer you do that. Yeah.
While I respect the lively debate and thoughts of my colleagues, I believe this is a work session and we shouldn't be doing debate in this work session. And I think that might help with the time factor.
You can't take action.
We can't take action. What did you say, Mr. Trainee? We didn't hear you.
I can debate, just can't take action on it.
Ms. Jones?
Mr. Chair, I think the definition of a work session is that it's an opportunity for the assembly to gather information. So it might be somewhere between Mr. Rivera and Mr. Trainee, but I do think that debate is going to take you longer, and technically debate is for the floor.
Sure.
I think that's, so that's up to you, but that's what the definition is.
Well, I think that
For
this,
gathering information.
I feel that discussing things from our colleagues is gathering information from them. But I agree that we shouldn't be debating with each other. That's fine. But we're presenting our own amendments right now, so we're gathering information from each other in that sense. Mr. Trainee, do you want to say something?
Yes, finishing up on amendment number 1 that I've got. What I'm talking about, I heard from the fire chief that generally deals with a smaller population. That makes him no less valuable than other part of Matrix. Quite frankly, that tender serves a lot of other service works in that area. I've got the Knox Isle, which is down to Lake Coast. They don't have fire suppression system there, no underground hydrants. So this could help them out if they have a fire there. But I remember years ago when we had the building on the top of Second Heights there, burned to the ground. It's a restaurant. Do you remember that?
I do not, Mr. Trainee.
They did not. Fire equipment put that out. They didn't let it burn. I don't want it to ever happen again. I've got a lot of letters to people today opposed to my plans to try and wipe out flowers. That's another amendment. But I don't want to hurt the library, but I also want to make sure that anytime we need to have fire suppression systems, it's there, viable. Because what I'm seeing on TV down there is way too late for people to die. I won't see that happen in nature. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Trainee. What is that, Mr. Davidson?
I just want to correct that earlier someone stated that the budget for the library is $14 million, it's actually $9 million. So it's about a quarter of this proposal would impact about a quarter of the library's operating.
Thank you, Ms. Davidson. So we're going to go on to amendment number 2. Same set of facts in terms of the fire department. This is my amendment. So what this does is it restores the ladder truck, and then it wait, hold on, let me make sure I got this right. Should be restoring the ladder truck there. Yeah. I don't know if okay. It restores the ladder truck, and then it shifts the, I'm not sure if the narrative actually says this correctly, but it restores the ladder truck, and then it shifts the closure of the tender from Station 14 to Station 9. And the reason I did that is because, as the fire chief has stated, there are 3 South Anchorage tenders, and there is only 1 East Anchorage-Stuckagon tender. Now, I also don't want to concentrate all of the cuts in South Anchorage, and that's why it restores the ladder truck, and then it shifts the cost savings, $1 million from AFD's overtime budget, and $885,000 from various other departments, and you can see it there. Basically, I took that, it's about a 0.3% reduction, or I guess it's about 3% reduction from every department, except, no, it's 0.3% from every department except for police and fire. So it is a small cut to the library, for example, a small cut to development services, a small cut to municipal attorney, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not thrilled about these cuts. I think our municipal departments are not overfunded by any stretch of the imagination, but I am, like you, trying to find money to restore the ladder truck. Go ahead, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm curious, the difference between amendment number 1 and amendment number 2. So they both have the same dollar amount.
Yep.
If I understand correctly, amendment 1 gets both apparatus back to operation, and
Yep.
this one only gets one.
Yep.
So what's the difference there?
So
You might have just explained.
I did. So, I recognize from the administration that we have a deficit. We're trying to close that deficit. So you can't just restore things without cuts. So I restore the ladder truck, which is, I think, about $2 million.
And truck 12, you mean, right, when you say the ladder truck?
Yes, from Station 12 ladder truck in South Anchorage. And that saves about $2 million. It costs about $2 million. And I find that money by taking $1 million out of AFD overtime and then another $885,000 out of every other department. That still leaves $500,000, more than $500,000 somewhere that goes to the tender at 14. So I'm still going to close the tender, but rather than tender at 14, I close the tender at 9. And I wanted to ask the chief, do you happen to know how many times tender 9 has been called out in the last year to date versus tender 14?
I knew you were going to ask me that. I didn't think of that. We've got you guys' numbers. Tender 9.
Sorry, I've got 14.
We've got 14. So in 2000 to date, tender 14 has gone on 52 EMS runs because it also goes on EMS calls, and it's gone on 50 fire-related calls. We did some searching to see which fires actually related to Stuckagon Heights area. In 2018, they've had 2 responses to Stuckagon Heights, 0 were fire. In 2017, there were 5 responses, 4 were fire related, 2 outside fires, 1 light smoke, and 1 residential fire. In 2016, there were 5 calls, 1 chimney fire and brush fire.
Right.
And in 2015, there was 1 fire call related to residential fire. That's for Stuckagon Heights. I believe.
So I was sent numbers, and I have no way to verify them, but from someone in the fire department, but not in your leadership team, that said that tender 14 has actually been called out 5 times more than tender 9 year to date. And that's all different types of calls, because I recognize that most of the calls actually aren't up to Stuckagon. Some of them go to other parts of the Anchorage. I think some of them even go out to Eagle River. I always said there's some backup contingency there, right? But it does seem like the tender does get called out quite a lot. Not always for brush fires or structure fires in Stuckagon, but it is used. Isn't that correct?
That is correct, yes. It is used more.
Right.
Back to, we didn't base our decision just based on strictly call volume. We also looked at potential responses that they would have to go on, fire potential, what that really means, and the service provided by all of the units within the community. We have other stations and other apparatus with much lower call volume. However, geographically, they're isolated, or there's some other reason why we chose tender 14. Same thing with truck 12. It wasn't strictly based on just response.
I recognize that, and I also suspect, although I don't expect any of you to answer this question, that you didn't want to concentrate all your cuts in South Anchorage. So it makes sense to share the burden a little bit. But if I'm restoring their ladder truck, it seems to me they could also, if I'm restoring their ladder truck, it doesn't seem as devastating to pull a tender when there are 2 other tenders in South Anchorage. That's my explanation for my amendment. Does anyone else? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Dice.
So, I don't, excuse me, have anything, all my firefighting experiences at sea or in the Arctic. But when I sat in this assembly 30 years ago, we used to have a super ladder truck, and it was called Bluebird or something, and it was acquired when we got high-rise buildings here. As I understand at that time, that it was for rescuing people in upper stories and so on. It never got used, and so on. But intuitively, I would think that we rarely use the ladder truck capacity much and that tenders with water is a higher priority. Tell me.
Well, so, because the majority of the community has hydrants,
Yeah.
we don't use the tenders very often because they are set up for mobile water supply in areas outside of hydrants, and the majority of the community is hydrant or has hydrants. The truck
Except the
company-
hillside New River.
And Stuckey Heights.
And Stuckey Heights.
Yep.
So the truck company doesn't just rescue people off of really tall buildings. They do other work. So on a structure fire, their job is ventilation, rescue, forcible
that.
entry, those kind of things. So the truck companies go on every working fire we have. They are also our public assist vehicles. So if we have, we do lift assist. If someone.
Now, my question was ladders.
Yes,
Do we use the ladder capacity on our equipment much?
we do.
Do we?
Yes, I couldn't compare between the tenders, but the ladder capacity, the aerial apparatus piece of it, yes, for ventilation, accessing high, any of our structure fires. Unfortunately, many of
All right.
our
You answered my
structure
question.
fires are in very large buildings.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So we have Mr. Constant, and then Mr. France, and then Mr. Welton, Mr. Croft. There are more amendments on fire we could get to.
Just in my district in the last year that I witnessed, very close to the fire being put down, there were 2 ladder operations. One where there was a mother and 2 babies that died down at East Chester, and the truck was instrumental because of the layout of the neighborhood. It went right over the road. And then there was this horrible situation where there was a 7,000 square foot lot with 15 foot tall of junk surrounding a house. It was a rotten old house. The fire was huge, and they had to go in over all the junk
Okay, I got
from the
it.
street. And so that's 2 that I witnessed.
Mr. France?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chief Hendrick, so why didn't you propose cutting the tender at Station 9?
Basically, because of geographical location and potential for fire on the hillside. Just the population is bigger. If we have one single structure fire on the hillside, due to the length of distance from any water supply, it will take all 3 tenders to deliver enough water to put out those fires. So if we took tender 9 out of service, we would be bringing tender 14 from clear across town all the way to. I also have just a comment on the $1 million out of our overtime budget. Unlike other entities, Anchorage Fire Department does not use our overtime discretionary. It is used to meet minimum staffing. If $1 million is moved taken out of our overtime budget, about September or August, we will be shutting rigs down because we won't have enough money to pay the overtime to staff for leave. And so that $1 million reduction may look good on paper, however, in practical application, it would force us to shut down a variety of rigs on a rotational basis starting August, September, and we don't know when that would hit. We typically, our overtime budget is not discretionary. We can't just decide not to call people in overtime. Minimum staffing, we have collective bargaining agreement requirements. We also have an OSHA requirement to deliver a certain number of people on a call before we can make entry. Also, unit utilization. If I'm shutting down a couple of rigs, that means all the other apparatus, their utilization during the day is going to go up, and we're going to have to start stacking emergency calls. And for the fire department to stack emergency calls is a totally different situation than it is for PD or any other entity.
Yeah, I don't think it looks good on paper. I don't think it looks good at all. I'm hopeful that we can find additional revenue by August, September, so that we can undo this.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Mr. Trainee.
Thank you, sir. Just reference that I am concerned about $1 million out of the overtime budget, because if we take this now, they're going to run out of money, like the chief is saying. The problem is, remember we had this last year, we couldn't figure out what the fund balance was. We need to remember that and keep that in our minds when we're doing things like this. I can't support taking $1 million from potential overtime budget to be utilized.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Weddleton and Mr. Croft were in the queue. And we'll go to you, Mr. Falsey.
I'll ask my question anyway, but I hear it was all solved. At one point on here, so you have the 2.4 million listed here. Should it be the 1.885? That's really all you're doing.
No, it should be 2 point. It should
But
be
you're
2.5.
adding back $1 million plus that 85, and
I'm
you're
gonna
taking
do that.
that from overtime and
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Because we are adding in the ladder truck, right?
Right, but you're not taking the tender stays gone, a tender stays gone, so you're not.
Yeah.
So it should be a
Yeah.
different amount.
Yeah, you're right.
And then, I don't support this, but so you're talking station 9, but we hear from the chief that actually might be 8 you want to get rid of, because 8 backs up 14. And you're not going right. Makes it make more sense either. Like it.
8 goes on a significant number of calls, and geographically, they're pretty isolated, and they're the first unit for the other, like the mid-hillside area of O'Malley Road. So looking at their call volume in isolation, they were not in our, when we were looking at the tenders, we would not consider 8.
Okay, so
Or
if
10.
this ugly amendment were to go, you would leave it at station 9.
We probably would, yes.
Thank you. Okay. So yeah, you're right. It doesn't actually save the full 2.5 because I put back in the ladder truck. All right. So go on to the next amendment. Oh, Mr. Croft. I'm sorry, Mr. Croft.
Two quick questions. So isn't the ultimate solution, at least for Stuckagin, to have hydrants or water reserves there? Has that been proposed?
So, yeah, actually, it would be very beneficial if, not just Stuckagin Heights, other areas, but Stuckagin Heights' problem is water access. So having, and we did have a conversation with AWU of how much it would cost to put hydrants, to run water lines up to Stuckagin Heights and put it in, probably $10 to $12 million. If you do the math, if it's $10 million, the cost of the tender, to staff the tender for the next 17 years, if we put invested $10 million in, and they have a hydrant up in that area, that would give water supply. It takes 17 years to pay that off. So it would be a good long-term investment to focus on having an adequate water supply up in the Stuckagin Heights area. Also, that stuff costs. We either pay $560 million or $560,000 a year forever, or we do an initial investment of $10 million and give them an adequate water supply for that entire neighborhood. So there are other ways to address the lack of water. We have the same issue on the hillside. We invested in better road construction and access and water up on the hillside. There's a cost to that. So it just depends on how we want to pay that cost.
And that's done through a service area, a special assessment?
I believe that could be a special assessment area. I mean, we did have that discussion.
Real quickly, part of the money we needed to free up in this budget was to pay for the certificates of participation on the repayment of some of the police and fire retirement system. Is that bondable itself? It is a form of bond. Is it bondable on our general obligation bond?
Chair, I don't think so. When I think about that, it certainly is not a capital asset, so it is the usual fund. So I don't think you can pledge general obligation. We do have some ability to refinance debt, and potentially could use that to do it, but I would have to investigate it.
If you look into whether that is, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I was thinking about this. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So doesn't the ladder truck, if we restore that, doesn't that carry water as well?
No. Well, some of our ladder trucks do, but it's such a small amount, that's not their purpose, is to go fight fire, or to extinguish the fire. They do a lot of the other work that happens during a residential fire. So they wouldn't, what we do is we use it as basically, it does have a pump, and we can pass water through it. But the amount of water is so small that it's basically enough water to fill those lines until they get connected to another water supply. What we do is when they're on scene and we spray water out of the nozzle at the end of the ladder, that is because they're hooked up to some type of hydrant or water supply, and that's where the water comes from for the aerial apparatus.
And I heard the parts of Stuckagin Heights, or some people actually have water tanks up there that they've filled for fire.
We believe so. We're actually trying to get a good information on exactly how much water would be available if we had to fight a fire up there, but we don't have that answer yet.
Okay, great, thank you. Mr. Falsey?
Just a brief observation on the across the board 0.29% cut that's included in this age amendment two. First, I just want to observe that there's some of these cuts that are not really discretionary. So second from the bottom, the TANs expense, that's the tax participation note expense.
Okay.
We borrow money before we get all of our property tax payments. I don't know that we can actually reduce that number. Similarly with the convention center reserve, there may be more of a story there. The only other thing to give the assembly clarity on is that what looks like an across-the-board even level cut ends up in operation not being even for reasons like, for instance, Public Works Administration is $11.8 million. Something like $9 million of the 11.8 is all WRSA money. So at 0.3% is really only hitting the remaining $2 million of the Public Works Administration budget. So this would have a pretty differential impact in the word tax.
Thank you, Mr. Falsey. Okay, we'll go on to the amendment number 3, still on firefighting, and this is one from Mr. Constant.
Thank
Constant?
you. Yeah. So, it's always a gamble when you take money from snow plowing. Some of us remember the year when we had all the snow, the roads weren't plowed, and everyone screamed. But I have had conversations with forecasters, the National Weather Service, asked them, point blank, do we budget status quo, additional funds, or less for snow plowing? And they said, well, we don't like to get into that level of forecasting. We wouldn't spend a lot of money. And so I would suggest to the administration, if this were to pass, that they allow M&O to staff up to the level that they need to manage the snow that we have. And we would fix if there was a minus in the first quarter. But that this is the likeliest, safest place for us to find funding to ensure that our fire risk on the hillside stays within at least the most acceptable range that we can get it, even though we probably need more up there. And it, to me, is the cleanest way for us to achieve the goal of fully funded fire department.
Thank you. Any questions, any comments from admin folks? Is anyone here from M&O? Oh, hey, I'm sorry, Ski. For some reason I didn't see you.
Yeah, a couple things.
Could you identify yourself for the record? I'm sorry.
Alan Chakowski, Director of Maintenance and Operations.
Thank you.
One of the things, when you look at the M&O budget, you'll see a number of $88 million. 47.2 of that is debt service, which is not a true number. So, but when I looked at these numbers, I ran some calculations this morning. Of the numbers that are here, these are the laborers, full-time employees, and when you get into some of the other issues, so the equipment cost of $2.2 million, those are fixed costs. I can't change those unless I lay people off. And everybody talks about snow removal, snow removal. Last weekend when it was raining buckets, we were out chasing drainage problems for the whole weekend, and freezing rain is in the forecast this weekend. So you can't use just snow as a forecast. But in these numbers, over almost 90% are pretty much fixed costs when you look at it. If it doesn't snow at all, yeah, there's some of these numbers would go down, but we have to be prepared. The fuel costs don't go away when I'm sanding; they don't go away. So I ran the numbers, and basically of this 90 million, really discretionary, probably less than 500,000. And what we do every year that I've been here, any money that doesn't get used gets sent back in laps at the end of the year. So I just can't see taking that amount of money from us we couldn't function. So.
Chief?
I probably have a group of people in the back row who will not be happy when I say this, but if we cut snow plowing, our call volume is going to go up, and our ability to get to fires and get to people who are in need of our help will definitely be impacted. So, it's something that has to be considered, is the fact that if we can't get to the calls because of snow load, and because that is such an unknown, that not only puts the public at risk, but it also puts our employees at risk.
Thank you. Mr. Constant.
Quick question. On those years when you do give back money, what's the scale of the money you get back?
Pardon?
You just said that when you have excess, you send it back. What is the excess money given?
Across the department, it could be in the $1.5 to $2 million range.
Right.
Lance, can you give the number from last year?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question.
He asked how much the lapse were.
Well, for 17, I can't tell you because we're not done, but it's, I think it's going to be probably 500 to 750.
So it would be great, Lance, if we could get an average looking back at what that number is that we returned, because my approach to this is that we would, I hate to say do it to you this way, but agree with you on that, but do it up front where we don't appropriate, and when we come back to the halfway point of the year, look at that number. Are we on track? Are you going to have money back, or can we hold the line? And so that's, I'm hoping we can just flip that equation for a year while we maintain fire service.
And I understand what you're saying, but I think you have to look at the fixed cost that I can't do away with. This number looks rosy, but it's not as rosy as it
Right, and
is.
that comes to the question of what's the average return that might be returned back to the budget from M&O, because that will get us close to a number I think that will be reasonable.
All right, so we'll move on to the next amendment. Next we have another one of my amendments, very simple. It shifts the money we would be saving by cutting tender 14 and instead cuts tender 9. And the reason, I think we've debated and talked about the reasons, we've discussed the reasons rather enough already. And I'm sure that my folks from South Anchorage aren't happy about this one. It's like I am very much not happy that the administration is proposing to cut the only tender in East Anchorage. Okay? All right. That was amendment number 4. Oh, yeah, no, it was 4. It was 4. Now, we could take up Ms. Domboski's amendment 17, since I think it's the same topic. Why don't we do that?
Okay, so my amendment is not to make AWW happy, but I'm proposing to cut the IGC that they charge for fire hydrant maintenance. They charge approximately $300,000 a month to shovel out the fire hydrants, to paint fire hydrants, put antifreeze in the fire hydrant, which it certainly, in my view, is a little excessive, but they are, as it's been explained to me, they're spreading the cost of the rest of their infrastructure, and that's why, in part, that IGC is so high is because it's monetized out. However, in my view, public safety is the most primary, most important thing that we provide. Everybody has heard me fight over the years not to cut rates specifically because it's not about run value. I don't care how many fires they have on the hillside, it just takes one to kill 500 people. It's just, that's just the bottom line to me. So when it comes down to it, when you look, and I want to thank Mr. Wellington, Ms. Wilbrance for letting me look at their books, so I didn't bring mine. But when you look at their, and I know some capital whatever is mixed in, but when you look at their cash balance at ABU, last year was in the $30 million range, this year's in the $60 million range. Frankly, I put public safety above everything else. And I think this is a cost-neutral way in the overall scheme of the budget to make sure we cover our most fundamental need for our residents in both East Anchorage and South Anchorage. So again, if they charge about, and Stephen, I think got the actual number for me, Mr. Nuss, but say they charge $300,000 about a month, it's $3.6 million a year. They charge the fire department for hydrant maintenance. That's a little excessive. So I take out 2.453,344, and they're still left with 1.14 million. They'll still get from the fire department for an IGC for hydrant maintenance.
So I'm going to ask a question of the admin, then we'll go to you, Mr. Croft. You know, AWU is a utility. Can we change their IGCs like this without having to worry about the RCA or anything like that?
I'm not sure. That is a question we'll investigate before we.
Because it would impact ratepayers, correct?
I've been on this body for years, and this has been a fight. We've done it multiple times. There's been times we haven't charged it, and there's been times we have charged it. I've seen it myself, so I know it can be done.
Mr. Croft?
Well, it was the same question. Can it be added to the rate base or not?
I think that would look for some assistance from Steve Nuss from AWU.
So both Brett and I are here, but Steve Nuss, Engineering Division Director for Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility. I've been going back and forth since Amy brought this up a few minutes ago with my finance folks. So right now there's a contractual obligation between AWW and the fire department to provide this service. We went to the RCA and got approval for a rate that covers the actual cost of maintenance and performing the work, but also the value of replacing the fire hydrant assets as they wear out.
So that's what the monthly fee that we charge the fire department is. Right now, it's actually $4.9 million is the approved rate for the entire year, about $400,000 a month. If the assembly was to say, we don't want the fire department to have to pay that, what we would have to look at is our contractual obligation with the fire department to reduce the scope of service that AWW provides. Whether or not that's decreasing the amount of shovel outs, reducing the pump outs, not fixing the brakes. Right now, we have about a 99% service rate. Out of 7,500 hydrants, we have about 60 to 70 out at any one time waiting repairs. Some of those are private hydrants, but maybe we don't repair those that go out of service, and that impacts the fire hydrant's ability to obtain water in other areas when they may need it there. It may impact the ISO rating. We worked very hard with the fire department a number of years ago to bring the ISO rating for everybody within the municipality that's within 5 miles of a fire station up to an ISO rating of 1, which reduces the overall insurance burden for all the ratepayers there. So those are things that would be impacted or potentially impacted if we did do a reduction of this. Not saying that you can't, but those are things that would be out on the table.
Why does it have to be a reduction? Why can't you put that in the rate base, put that charge in the rate base?
The RCA would look at it and say, is this fair and equitable to the rate of the rest of the ratepayers? Are there other people that are receiving a benefit that aren't paying? Those are things that we would have to investigate a little bit more before I can give you a straight answer.
Do you know if Juneau or Fairbanks or whatever other municipalities put this in the rate base or pay it under the fire department?
I don't know that right now.
Thank you, Mr.
Ms. Boston
Thank
first.
you. I just want to clarify a couple of things. First of all, there's absolutely no question that over the years, this number has driven up dramatically. And I remember many a times when fire, basically it was like adopt a hydrant. Stations went in the wintertime and they shoveled out their own hydrants, right?
Yeah, we still do that on the heavy service.
So my point is, if we need to balance it in a way we can, but I'm telling you, I spoke with Chief Fultonweider just a couple days ago about this, and he was fit to be tied because he basically said it's a fleecing of the fire department. This has not always been this way. I don't care how Ava was pitching it now. It absolutely could be changed because I've been on the body when it's been a lot lower. It's significantly inflated in my opinion. And I think what Ava is frankly doing is they're shifting a cost to the fire department that's excessive. I think as the appropriating body, we have the ability and the authority to drive it back down. And if it means the firefighters have to go and shovel out some more hydrants, I think that can be done. Right? Okay, there you go.
Mr. Thompson.
Just on that note, I think that if in fact the question has never been brought to the RCA, that's a fair question to bring to them because the beneficiary of these hydrants is not the fire department, it's the homeowner, and the homeowner is the ratepayer. And so it seems like there's a fair question to draw the line to the actual beneficiary. And so if we're charging the fire department for a need that could be a ratepayer expense, we need to ask that question.
But, I mean, it is the case, right? Are there places in Anchorage, I don't know who would answer this, I guess you, Brett. Are there places in Anchorage that have fire hydrants and thus that benefit, but don't have the whole neighborhood as ratepayers?
No.
So
we have a few isolated fire hydrants along the transmission line along that Elmore Road alignment where there's no water service. But I don't remember exactly how that's covered, but I think that the maintenance of those is covered by the cost to the fire department, which is part of our cost of service analysis, and that is reviewed and regulated by the RCA.
But that does strengthen Mr. Bosky and Mr. Constant's argument that if the benefit of the hydrants is largely coterminous with our ratepayer base, which makes sense, the water goes to ratepayers and to hydrants. I don't know. That seems to have some logic to it.
Well, I'm not sure what you're suggesting here, but again, the cost is well documented. It's not it didn't come out of thin air to create this cost. I know that Chief Fultonweider had some different views on the subject back in 1990s, and the decision was made to pursue the approach that we are still using today.
Thank you, Mr. Brookwood. Okay, good discussion. Continuing on to, so now we will leave the realm of fires for now and move to flowers and other kind of horticulture. Okay. Let's see. So the first one is by Mr. Weddleton. Amendment number 5, Mr. Weddleton, you want to describe it?
Yeah, I don't like this one a bit. I really like the flowers. I didn't want to cut something that I didn't like fire stations in North Anchorage. But I think of all our priorities, crime, homelessness is obviously it's in our face every minute. It's a blight on the city. It's a terrible situation for 1,000+ people living in our parks now. And I think until we solve that problem, we haven't earned these beautiful flowers. And this will be symbolic to everyone. That we get this down, homelessness and the crime associated with it, and drug addiction, get a grip on that, and it won't be fast. Then we can re-earn the flowers. But I just think of all the priorities, that has to come way ahead of the flowers. And I think it's extremely unfortunate, but I believe that's the case. And this would, the estimate here is that this is basically all the flowers, not just downtown, throughout the city.
Well, Mr. Peterson, but I actually want to hear from, I don't know if there's anyone here who represents this part of the city. Can you identify yourself for the record? Great, and I'm curious about that too, because the other amendment we have, which is 770,000, I thought it cut all the flowers, but this one is 1.7. So what else would be cut there, or do we actually have 1.7?
That is my entire budget. So that takes care of any road right-of-way work I do. It takes care of site issues. It takes care of our presence in Town Square, which is a safety issue. We're used to working with the people that are there that are less desirable. We know how to work around them. We have ways, without being confronted and everything, to get them to move along. It's amazing what you do when you tell somebody you need to set up a water sprinkler. We've been doing this for years. We work around and we clean up human feces. We clean up all the needles. We have training for our people. They know how to do this. We take care of road right-of-ways. Big ones I know some of you all are interested in is Northern Lights. We have things that are on the rotation. We work closely with streets. They call us and tell us, hey, we have this site issue. We're trained and skilled in the way we prune trees and remove things. So we'll go in and take care of it. I always tell people, because they say horticulture and everybody says flowers. Well, horticulture is trees, shrubs, flowers, turf. We mow. We take care of all the assets that the city has put in landscaping. When you have a new area landscape, as soon as it comes off a contract, we pick it up and take care of it. Over the 700,000 is the flowers downtown and everything. These are things that I used to be in the field, and I know how the tourists feel about that. I'm pretty sure I know how the business owners downtown feel about the flowers. This is something our city is known for worldwide. And I agree, the flowers are not a safety issue. But a lot of the things we do are safety issues. We'll go in and we clean out brush and everything. We clean out the camps. I'm also in charge of CWS. So we work in tandem. We can go in and clean the brush and everything. But also, the natural resource manager is under horticulture. So all of the hillside, all the parks, far north bicentennial and everything, if this goes through, you get rid of all of that. We don't have a natural resource manager to take care of those assets, to work on the trails, to go out when we've got somebody cutting trees, go out there and stop them from destroying our assets. This budget covers a lot more than just flowers.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my question is, would this close the greenhouse at Russian Jack permanently?
Yes, sir. You can't mothball that facility and bring it back up.
Right.
It is, 64 years old.
Thank you.
So when it's gone, it's gone.
Mr. Weatherby?
How much is just flowers?
That's,
The next one's 700.
we've got some other amendments on that, yeah.
It's just downtown flowers, but who does leave the flowers out in the airport, Nard Road?
The airport is their own flowers. They have a
So that
horticulture.
welcome acreage and all that?
Okay, welcome acreage and everything is us.
That's you.
Yes.
So,
That's downtown.
but that's not downtown. I mean, what if you leave the airport, you're on international?
700,000 for the downtown.
So the 700,000, I'm asking
Well,
Liz
also-
Stanley because she has the money number.
The 700,000 is for flowers.
Okay,
So,
citywide.
Citywide.
Okay, that was more my intent, so I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
Question?
All right, we have Mr. Dyson in the queue and then Mr. Constant.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're trying to do, John. Last year, when I made a clumsy attempt at dealing with this, what I tried to do was leave everything that Parks and Rec, all the gyms and all that kind of stuff in place, as do you. I didn't want to cut the growing of the plants and all those things. In Eagle River, they, I don't know, they spent 15,000 to 18,000 or something to get buy flowers and plantings and stuff, something like that.
We design and grow all the flowers for the plantings out there.
Yeah, and then it's taken care of by volunteers. The Chamber of Commerce largely, as I remember, does that. What I see as the priority here, what can be done by volunteers. We've all seen Adopt a Highway, and Nordic Ski Club does a lot of trail maintenance and so on. And there are interest groups, I believe, that could pick up quite a bit of this. I tried to make a preliminary contact with Anchorage Garden Club. We've got a lot of enthusiasts. So if we're going to go after any part of this, the thing that only they can do, I think we probably need to leave intact and figure out what could be done, in a progressive way on getting volunteers to do it. But anyways, I'm sure you thought of all that, and you're thinking way ahead of me.
Mr. Constant, Mr. Croft?
Thanks. I have a question for your finance person. What's your name again?
Sandy.
Sandy.
You can just call me Sandy.
Wait.
Elizabeth Stanley.
Oh,
Elizabeth Stanley, great. So what's the percentage of the flower distribution downtown versus other parts of town?
Say 80% is downtown.
So it's ultimately cut to the downtown.
Yes, correct.
And East Anchorage where they're grown.
Mr. Croft.
So, to Mr. Wellington, I guess, so is this a zero or a negative? The same question sort of you asked before, but are you putting it in overshoot flow shelter, and therefore it's a zero, or is it available for appropriation and it's significant?
Oh, that's interesting.
But you'd asked before, I thought, well, and maybe I'm missing something, but you say, we assign these funds to overflow shelter and abatement. So in that case, it's a zero, or is it just available and that's one you possibly use?
Well, no, I think it would be, it's a negative, take money out of Parks and Rec and put it into whatever department does overflow shelter abatement. So you're just moving money. So it's minus.
Minus and plus, okay, yes, thanks. It doesn't free up fire or other money, but it puts it in that place.
Sorry. Mr. Weddleton?
Like I said, I don't like this. It would be primarily the downtown. If you could say, that's not my district, I'm dumping on Mr. Constant's district. It's our downtown. It's a citywide thing. And the homeless are largely in his downtown, and we would put this money to help rectify that. But this is a citywide thing. And, the blight of homelessness and drug addiction and crime is citywide, no matter where it's not. And downtown that is not attractive because of flowers, and that's where we would head with this. That's a problem for all of us. Tourism is we like the flowers. But I just think our priorities are crystal clear. We have a serious problem between illegal campers, homelessness, drug addiction, alcoholism. We need to put way more money into it than the $500,000. As unpleasant as it is.
Thank you, Mr. Weldon. So I had intended to do all of the flower amendments kind of in order, but there were two here inserted by Mr. Rivera that have to do with homelessness, so I think that's how it got rearranged. So I might rearrange that in the final packet so we can hit all of the ones in with flowers first. But for now, let's go on to amendment number 6, which is by Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and if I could also indulge you to add, it's in the front cover, but there's a third amendment regarding homelessness. I would add those after my amendment 7 to discuss. So after a couple of months of working back and forth with the administration, I have come up with 3 amendments. And I know we don't have Rivera amendment number 1, 2, 3, but the way that these are presented are the priorities. So this one right here that I'm about to talk about will be the first priority to fund. And this one is pretty simple. It is moving M&O funds to Health and Human Services and Parks and Rec to fund overflow shelter and to fund camp cleanup and abatement. So it would fund overflow shelter in the amount of $480,000, which would get you from May to December of next year, and then it would do an increase in abatement, which is currently funded at $150,000, an additional $300,000. So that $450,000 would allow for year-round camp cleanup, which is something that we have heard from our constituents that they would like us to do. I know that I don't want to rehash the arguments that were made during Mr. Constance's previous amendment, but I believe that this amount of money is something, and Eminem can correct me if I'm wrong, but something that they can absorb, or if not, we can look at adding what I think would be a much smaller amount to them in first quarter.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Okay, any comments, questions, clarifying? Mr. Tchaikovsky, do you want to speak to this? What would be the practical impact of a $780,000 cut to M&O? And I guess where do you think you would allocate that cut? I guess it says snow plowing, budget, contracts, and salaries, but that's fairly broad. I mean, so we could.
Yeah, again, our operation is an annual operation, so probably the most discretional money I have is in snow removal.
Yeah.
So that would be over half of the snow hauling budget. So,
yeah.
I mean, I'd have to pull from somewhere we could, look at it a little closer, but that's normally where, but after 10 years of budget cuts, that's about all that's left, is either people or our contractual services, which is either sweeping or hauling.
Thank you, Mr. Scott.
Also, I think John has brought up a couple of times that a winter operation for the park side for the staff is not a safe proposal.
Is not what? I'm sorry?
It's not a safe proposal. It's trying to remove camps during the winter because of the snow conditions, the ice conditions. Taking staff out there at that time is a hazardous situation. So.
Thank you. I'm sorry, can you identify yourself for the record again? Thank you. Okay. All right. Well, let's move on to your next amendment, Mr. Rivera.
I would just add to that note that anyone speaking about year-round abatement should speak to the fact that any abatement after snowfall is going to be more slower, it's more expensive, more challenging, more limited, even if we're well-funded. And so that's the challenge we have to make sure the public understands because of safety and other variables. So I support year-round abatement. I just know that it's not going to be at the clip we could do in the summer.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Rivera, your next amendment.
All right, thank you. So amendment number 7. This one is similar, though I think a little bit more broad than Mr. Littleton's amendment. And this one shifts $420,000 from Parks and Recreation to Health and Human Services. And what this one does is it increases the funding for the mobile intervention team from a 5-day to 6 days level of service. It also expands the team. So we're talking about $220,000 in that area. And then this also allows for a lease of a facility for storage, and that's about another $200,000.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Mr. Constant.
So if you take these two amendments together, we are creating an increase of almost $750,000, and then another $420,000. Where does that come from in the parks budget, do you imagine? Because the parks has been our operator in terms of getting out there and doing the abatement work. And so isn't this a net, doesn't this cause like a net zero sum gain of
So, as we have heard from our constituents, they want us to prioritize our cleaning camps, camp abatement, and this entire process. So, while yes, this is shifting sort of Parks and Rec from doing one thing to funding a little bit more of another, I think it's something that we need to do because the community has called for it.
Doesn't that take the money away from the abatement?
This one, like I said earlier, very similar to Mr. Weddleton's, but a little bit more broad. So this would come from the Anchorage Bowl Parks operation budget, which includes horticulture, includes CWS, includes park maintenance. So that is likely where Parks and Rec will look at it.
That's abatement. So we're taking money from abatement to add to mobile intervention.
Horticulture is an abatement.
Community work services.
Well, right. You're correct there, community work services, but I think there are pieces here that aren't abatement related that Parks and Rec would look at to cut.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
Question on this, so you say lease of a facility for storage. Do we have to lease a facility, or we've got buildings here in Anchorage? I understand that they used to do when there's a building down in the port with the state owns, but we can use solid-waste services might have space.
This is my understanding from the administration that the strategy that they are proposing is a leasing facility.
Is that correct, anyone? Ona?
Through the chair to Mr. Weddleton and Mr. Rivera, the building that I believe you're talking about, Mr. Weddleton, would have to be paid for through a lease.
Even though it's owned, is that one that's owned by Solid Waste Services?
No, no.
Oh, it's not, right. So we don't have to lease it. Okay. All right. Okay. Do you have another amendment, Mr.
Yeah,
Weldon?
it's
I'm
in
sorry.
everyone's the front pocket. This is the last one, and so this is sort of priority number 3, which is a.
There is no number on it. It's just in your front pocket.
It's in your front pocket.
It was late breaking. We'll rearrange these a little bit for Tuesday night.
So this one makes cuts from various departments in the tune of $100,000 total and shifts out to Health and Human Services for them to run a diversion fund and client services fund. And this fund will basically meet a lot of the needs that we're hearing that the nonprofit sector doesn't have the ability to do. I think we've heard a lot in the news about how transportation has been a critical asset to helping with the Beans Cafe Brother Francis shelter. We've heard a lot about how rapid rehousing and rental assistance has been critical to keeping people out of homelessness, which is a critical component. I mean, I'm sure we don't have to spend more money on the other end of homelessness. So this makes small cuts to various departments except for APD, AFD, the library, and public transportation, and helps to create that fund.
Thank you. Let's see here. Okay, any questions or comments on that one, Ms. LaFrance and Ms. Dombrowski? Okay.
I was just going to ask, I've never seen an amendment where it just says various departments. So do you need every single department except the department listed?
So thank you. Based on feedback from the municipal manager, I will need to adjust this a little bit to take out a couple of funds.
So you'll give us a list?
Yeah, I'll get you a list.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Mr. France, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Felix, would this be then like for grants to nonprofits, or it's not for a hedge fund to provide that connection? I mean, what exactly would the 100,000 go towards, or what would it provide?
Right. So as it states in here, this is going to provide more funding to increase our ability to do rapid rehousing, which that is getting people into units that are available really rapidly when they fall into homelessness. Then that's also to provide a bridge to permanent housing, and that could take different looks. It could be rental assistance, and then transportation. The biggest thing that I have heard is from the Beans Cafe Brother Francis Shelter, just generally downtown to the hospitals, that transportation cost, who bears that brunt, and then other client needs. When I've talked to service providers in the nonprofit world, they talk a lot about how when someone moves into a new home or a new unit, they don't have anything. They don't have all of the basics that maybe we take for granted, and so they have difficulty getting all of those things. So this would be, things that case managers would say this is a priority. See if we can tap into the funds again.
Yes.
I would. I have in fact heard this week alone from 2 or 3 members of the public who are spearheading an effort to provide this kind of funding to the coalition from private sources. And if we decide to go this way, I would recommend we find a way to make this matching funds so that we at least attract in additional investment and don't find ourselves solely on the hook for providing this kind of cash asset to individuals on the street. And so it might be better as a grant program, and it might be better as a matching program. A grant to an entity that wants to provide these services to individuals.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. We'll move on. We've already done amendment number 8, so we'll move on to amendment number 9. This is Mr. Trainee. Mr. Trainee, you still on the line? Just heard the sound like you might have dropped off, unfortunately. Weird. Wow. We were going to do 9 because we already did 8. Let me see if Mr. Trainee is going to get back online. Yep. Yeah. Well, why don't we take a 5-minute break?
Eric? Got a minute?
That's right, so we're going to reorder these and make some small changes to mine at least, okay? I don't know if you can stay a little late tonight. I'm going to go, because after this I have the leadership meeting with the administration. I'm going to talk to them and see where they're at with this stuff. And then I want to come down and do another pass of this. Could you stay after? I'm not sure how long it will take. I'll probably be back by double check.
Also, I did not include
I'm back.
the cut that we were talking about the
Mr. Trainee, we're taking about a 4-minute
the one that
break.
you and I were talking about in the binder.
Okay, I've got a dark one.
For the district's parks and rec cut.
Do you want
That's fine.
do you have time to discuss your next amendment?
Oh, I have another meeting from 4 to 5. So
Yeah.
can I come meet you at 5?
Yes.
So can you wait 4 minutes?
Yeah.
He said he's got a doctor's appointment, but he'll wait 4 minutes to discuss his next amendment. Mr. Trainee.
He wants to discuss it now or?
In 4 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Dick, when is your doctor's appointment?
I'm sorry, what?
When is your doctor's appointment?
I know, we're 2:15, but I'm going to
Okay, because I could try to rearrange it. We'll take up all your amendments. Do you have any other amendments besides amendment number 9? Okay, yeah, I'm looking at all the amendments now. I only see that one. Okay. Okay.
If I could call back in
Where are you hearing for us? Johnny Ellis just texted me and says Scott Kawasaki beat Kelly. That was your rough move.
I was no, but he was ahead of the final count.
It don't matter.
What happened? No, I think God's calling you. Still not gonna have a cold because he's from more comments.
I'm really good friends with Gabby, actually. I gotta tell you, I think boy can't tell you.
My children, these 2 children, still within it and I didn't know this was shit like that.
Well, I'm the new second vice president. You're gonna know.
Congrats. That's awesome.
For 2 years. From now I'll be the new president.
Yeah. That's great. Mark Grover? Hopefully. He ran against his clean squad. Fine. All right, let's get rolling. We gotta reassemble the troops. Got one. What a day for news. Holy cow. Okay.
I think that's why she's left on the
Folks, can we get back in our chairs, please?
Let's roll.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Trainee, we are now on amendment number 9, which is your amendment. Do you have it in front of you? Do you want to describe it? Mr. Trainee, you there? Shoot.
He literally took the bathroom break.
He was there a second ago.
Wondering anything? I'm too old. You guys don't remember that skit.
No.
Glenn used to be on Saturday Night Live.
Let me call him. Hey, Dick, are you calling back in?
Everyone hates flowers.
Oh, okay. Okay, I understand. So we'll just read your amendment number 9, okay? Okay. Thank you. Bye, Dick. Mr. Trainee is unable to join us. He is on his way to Elmendorf. So his amendment number 9, he said he wanted me to read it. It's 100% reduction of proposed Parks and Rec's downtown flower budget, although as we've learned today, it's not actually just downtown. About 80% is used downtown, but it's also used in some other places. And it's a reduction. Interestingly enough, it doesn't point that money anywhere, so it's just a cut. I guess this is the last one of these, I think. So I'd like to ask some more questions of the Parks and Rec employees that run this program. So can you describe the process by which these are grown at Man Lizer and what the impact of this cut would be on the Man Lizer greenhouse?
Okay, basically, we design the beds, we order the seeds, and we grow all of these flowers. That's why we have the varieties that we have that you don't see in other parts of Anchorage or even Alaska. So basically what this would do is close the whole greenhouse operation. The only thing that could remain open would be the public greenhouse. But doing this, you also cut the staffing, for this. And basically, this is an old facility. newer facilities you might be able to mothball for like a year or 2 years. This facility you basically can't because of the age of it. So once you close these greenhouses down, they're done.
Yep. Someone mentioned public programs or youth programs. Is there anything like that at Nan Lizer or
We have
downtown?
Down in the public greenhouse, we do have people that come in. They have kids programs where the kids come in. We have groups that rent it for weddings and everything. We have people that just bring their kids in. We have people that suffer from SADS, SADS.
Seasonal affective disorder.
That come in and use this facility to get the amount of light and everything that they need to be able to cope on a daily basis.
Could you maintain that staff with this cut?
No, they really can't.
Okay.
This is a facility, the public greenhouse is open 7 days a week, 365 days a year. The only time we close it is if we're doing the massive cleaning and everything where it really is a safety issue.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on this amendment? No? Okay. All right. Well, moving on then. Mr. Constant, amendment number 10.
Thank you. So this one is a smaller approach to adding an asset to the municipality that I think we really need. I changed the title of the position. It creates one position in the health department under Natasha that is under Ms. Pineda that is a behavioral health specialist. And for the creation of this position, I took 2 positions out of the budget, one from the AERC, one investigator, and then 1/2 of a person from the transportation system. Public transportation. They added 14 positions in their budget this year, and so this reduces 1. And I don't think there's a department that has a public face in the municipality that doesn't provide some form of behavioral health intervention, whether it's the bus service, whether it's the fire department, the police department, whether it's the library, the flower department, wherever you are, the impacts of the behavioral health problem are everywhere. And one thing, if you look through your budget, nowhere will you see behavioral health, addiction, substance use, mental health written out. It's just not there. And so this is an opportunity for the municipality to take a step forward and a giant step back, because in the past we did have some expertise on this. Ms. Pineda is an expert in some of these issues, but her time is dedicated across a variety of positions and disciplines, and so she can't spend her time 100% focused on these issues. So I don't have them now, but I will have them for you on Tuesday to bring them. Letters, unanimous support resolutions from 4 of my 5 community councils, and there's broad support for this. I believe the administration doesn't oppose. Whether they support it or not, I don't know.
Thank you. Before we get to you, Mr. Wildton, this impacts at least 3 departments directly, AERC, HHS, and Transit. Is there anyone from any of those 3 departments that would like to speak to this amendment at all? HHS, Transit, AERC. I would think AERC would probably want to be here since they're losing one of their staffers. No? Mr. Weddleton?
I guess 2 points. One, the budget does have an increase, like a social worker or something.
I don't even have to ask Natasha. I don't know.
There is an increase? Doesn't the current budget have the new social worker, runs another social worker?
There is a social worker that works with the library that was funded through a mental health trust authority grant to the library that we supervise clinical working with her position, and she's like in our SAP system, but she works at the library.
I thought there was, but in this budget, one of the processes from last year was
There's a, and like, I think the budget proposal that I saw had a continuation of the MIT team, which is based in the fire.
and there's one in there.
And so this position was broadly a policy.
Yeah, quick follow-up, and we got 2 others.
Since people who is not here, I'm going to really take a long shot here, but part of the positions is not like new stuff going on. Is there going to take those 22-foot buses in-house. So it was contractual money that was coming in-house. So I suspect a half ton would be an impact somewhat. It's not like they're expanding this or.
Right. And they were contracted in this discussion. I didn't get a yes or no from them, but it was clear that leaving the half of positions, I originally taken one from each, leaving the half was very helpful.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance and Ms. Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And a question for either Mr. Constant or Ms. Kaneda. What specifically would the behavioral health specialist be doing, for example, providing support to social worker or other agencies or a whole different area?
It would be my hope that the function would be to perform short-term analysis of the systems and where are we having engagements with behavioral health issues and individuals who experience mental illness addiction, and then start to come up with a slate of options that can move forward into policy positions and growth of department. And I'll then defer to Ms. Pineda for her feedback.
Yeah, I think that's appropriate. I think they could also serve as a resource for the multiple different social workers deployed throughout the city in different places that are funded through our division. There's also, we get daily call. I mean, we're daily dealing with emergency situations, whether it's a shelter or a nonprofit calling us to ask us what we should do, me personally, what I should do about a particular person's crisis. So there's, I think, two parts of that: policy, environmental scan, understanding recommendations, and then helping manage the assets that we have to support the community providers.
And yeah, it was important to note that not just our own assets, but the community of assets, because there are hundreds and hundreds of people working on this, and the community doesn't have a single point of coordination.
Yeah, of course, Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With the possible availability of federal funds, state funds for opioid abuse and misuse money, would there be a possibility of grants for a position like this?
We're certainly trying to work with the state around what the opportunities are there. But sometimes the substance abuse related funds are very limited to only substance abuse related issues, and it is my understanding, based on this one short period of time here, that it is co-occurring. It is mental health issues. It is chronic, it is co-occurring disorders, and a lot of the funds that come through are very limited to a specific topic. But we certainly use any resources to leverage federal, state, local dollars.
Response to that?
Well, Ms. Davidson's been going on, let her go.
Hi. I was actually going to ask the same question as Suzanne, but I guess I'll just ask a follow-up question, which is when Forrest asked if anyone wanted to get up and talk about it, you didn't. So does that represent your enthusiasm about this proposal? Or I guess I just want to make sure this is something you really want, you really need. It seems to be coming more from Mr. Constant, but I want to know how.
It's definitely something this department needs. It's something our department used to have a whole division of behavioral health. We've provided a lot of coordination and support to behavioral health, to the community providers, not just behavioral health, the shelter systems. That all existed, but that was a long time ago. And there's been a slow, over the last decade, removal of all substance abuse related services. So we pieced together under umbrella with support of LD. We've got the state of Alaska, the National Guard worker with us, temporarily to help us put together a substance abuse related things. So there's definitely a need for it and a need for it.
And you can see where this has been in the state department and you want this to happen.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, go ahead, Mr.
I
Constant,
just want
sorry.
to come back on the idea that a person who comes into this will be professional enough to be able to scan the environment, also for funding opportunities, and drive funding into the system. That's one of the keys. Some of the concerns we've heard from the community is that, well, it's only Medicaid now. You know, the city can't really influence that. I would argue the opposite of that, that if we have someone who's actively convening and working with all of the folks in the media that are dealing with these issues, that person is perfectly positioned to find and derive funding sources to increase its success.
Thank you. Okay, on to amendment number 11. Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Davidson.
Can someone maybe just from the administration explain for me how many staff, I know we went through this presentation, but there are for the Equal Rights Commission and how that would impact them since they're not here? No?
I think they're technically one of ours.
Okay,
It's like, it's not very many.
Somewhere in the neighborhood between 5 and 7.
Yeah. Okay, on to amendment number 11. This is also Mr. Constant.
So although I'm dipping into two members from West Anchorage's district, I've heard a number of concerns from people who live on or near Lois Drive that it's a mess and it's not safe. It's challenging because it's a fire truck route and you have cars parked on the side of a very narrow roadway. And so this conversation's been ongoing for a few years. And I had talked to Mr. Hanson yesterday, and it was his conclusion that $500,000 would jumpstart this project and that they have achieved the right-of-way that they need to do this project. And so I'm hopeful that we can put this on the bond and get this project moving.
Is this, I'm sorry, Amendment 12 is also $500,000 for soon-to-be Lois Lane.
I think it's the same.
So, Mr. Croft and Mr. Constant, is there any distinction between these two?
No, he broke his up into bullets, but it's the same thing. We can add one to the other and add Ms. Quinn Davidson if she wants.
Yeah, if you guys could get together with Ms. Camacho, am I pronouncing it right? Ms. Camacho, and just merge it into one amendment, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll do that. And just briefly on the mayor, he's absolutely right. Lived around it, but also walked it recently with Mr. Stange from the community council there. It's both a mess and has a lot of potential. There is a bike path not very well maintained, bike and walking path there. And it's separated by some trees. And then there's an area where people just walk into the condominium development there. But there could be a way to cut a deal with the condominium developer, to put a fence to keep people off their land and then have them walk. So it both is difficult and has some potential that we just haven't looked at in a while. So I think this is money well spent to see if we can. We acquired the right of way in the sense that we resolved the state versus municipal, but we haven't settled with one landowner's acquiring, and that should be easy in the school district and acquiring. The other is a condo development. We're trying to have communication. There is the potential to have a pretty walkable area of that and connect up that neighborhood onto Benson and some of the bike paths there. So it has a lot of potential.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
I'm very familiar with this because I used to bike from Sand Lake to work along here. But it's one of hundreds of ways you can make these same points for. And I just in our city EIP list, community councils put in their requests and they're all ranked. With this, have you ever ranked?
Well, this has been Spinard's priority for a while.
I lived up there for 7 years. When I first moved here, I lived in the street for 7 years. 35 years ago.
Where is it on the CIP?
I'll try to change the name.
We have a list of your priorities. I have heard that you would be.
I'm Russ Oswald, I work with project management engineering. Sherry Hanson's out of town today. My understanding of Lois Drive is that, one, we just got a portion of it turned over to us, the portion that we have known from the state is being filed now. And there's sections of it that we have enough right of way to do a full development, and there's sections of it that we only own half the right of way. For we would have to require houses to do the full phase. So we need to study that, and I mean, we always study things that we actually do need to take a look back over what right of way we want to do wrong, and what we need to acquire right of way, and what the payments like. So it hasn't been ours, we have to maintain it.
So I want.
This rank on our long list of capital requests.
Right now, we had a pretty high last year until we realized after we really jumped into it and realized we didn't own it. So we were pushing it forward, so it fell off the radar.
And it worked its way up high, and then it's state right away, and so it dropped off.
That's right.
So it was pretty high up there.
It was. We were moving forward, thinking we were going to jumpstart it, and again, it was right next to it again.
So this has momentum.
Say it again.
It has momentum. It started.
Yeah, it should jump right. It should jump right.
So wait, I have a question then for the two sponsors and for P&E. I thought it was for, so one of your amendments says paved walk and sidewalk repairs and improvements in paved walk markings and signage. But I'm hearing that it's more planning that's needed. Is that right? So is this, will this $500,000 go?
There's really one of them is kind of a planning level, see what we have, what we need to do to it. And then I had to talk with our maintenance department this morning on it. And especially 32nd, where we have the connections and the tie over to Minnesota, which is on the second one.
Yeah.
Starting member crop. That really needs some pavement modifications and upgrades.
So
we
can,
just keep it going.
can you do both for $500,000? Can you do the sidewalk improvements?
No, we can do the study for $500,000, and that would just get us really to the craft level with get all the public meetings, do all the research, some of the field work.
So we can't actually combine these then, unless we want to up the price tag to $1 million.
We can work it out.
Okay.
Yeah, we can work it out. Yep. And, Mr. Chair, this is the
Yep.
last note.
Go ahead, Mr. Constantine.
I did throw in point number 4 to secure Mr. Reynolds' support.
Huh.
Yeah. But one last comment is at least the study would get us what we need. We would know where we need to go from there. Talking with maintenance, they said they could probably make it work for another couple of years.
Okay.
With our pavement.
With
But
pavement.
that doesn't
Sidewalk.
address the access concern with the pedestrian.
Right. That's all true. It's also true that we like to build things and do things, shovel ready, rather than just put a study on the bond. But I'll let y'all figure that out. Okay, so through 11 and 12, on to 13. I believe these are the beginning of our AWU. I think this has got 2. Mr. Bosky?
Yeah, these are both pretty simple. Amendment number 13 essentially is going to take this new project, T-Bird Grandview project, and it's going to replace it with a project that's been on the list for many years now, which is the Northern Communities Trunk Main Loop project. I think we're all familiar with it. It's pretty self-explanatory. This is consistent with resolutions that we've passed. I specifically listed AR 2018-347 Section 2. And again, this is a project that we've had on the list for a long time, and I'm replacing it with this new project because I think, frankly, we should finish what we started.
So it says C attached, but I don't.
I know, I forgot to attach it.
Okay.
Sorry.
Can AWU speak to this?
First, I'd say that the proposed project has been in our water master plan for a long time, with the idea that the project would be necessary to follow development that would take place in that area. There are some potential ancillary benefits to ratepayers for a modest redundancy of water transmission, but the principal benefit would go to the development of those properties. The money for the project is part of our capital improvements program as it stands now. It's distributed over out years from, I think, 2020, 21, 22, 22, 24 timeframe. So I don't believe it's necessary that we would move the funding up further into the near term. There's no way that we could be prepared to construct the project in 2019. We already have money appropriated to do design work. I guess the other thing I would just say is that a technical detail, clean water funding is actually provided by the state revolving fund for sewer projects. So the loans that we would try to use for these kinds of projects would come from one of 2 different sources. It's kind of counterintuitive, but the clean water fund is for sewer projects, the drinking water fund is for water projects. The idea that we would get grants is pretty remote. These are loan funds that come from the state, and the funding for the project will ultimately come from the ratepayers. If we had a water trunk improvement district, then the assessed properties that would be part of that improvement district would eventually become ratepayers, and their assessments would help offset the cost and provide cost recovery for some of the improvements that we've made into the project.
Thank you. Mr. Vossi, can I have a clarification here? So the project name is the same on both, if I'm not mistaken. So what's the difference between these two projects?
Well, when I get to the other one, I'm happy to propose it. Like I said, what the difference was is this T-Word Grandview project is now on the capital project, so they've removed the northern trunk main loop. And so what I'm saying is, no, let's put the northern trunk main loop, let's keep it in there, not strip it out. That's what they've done. So I've fixed it in there. And then the second one is just a different type of funding source here. At our work session, we learned they had about 2.2 million or so. And I'm proposing to, try to get some money from the state for 9.8 million. That's why it's in the other category. If you don't get it, you don't get it. But frankly, to be honest with you, when I look at this number, in my view, they're just making up numbers at this point when they say this project's going to be $28 million. If you have $12 million, which if you actually go back into the list, and I'm doing this off my head, but it was like project 1660, I think it was, for this specific project, they had about $12 million budgeted. And now all of a sudden they're saying it's $28 million. If you just think 1,000 foot of pipe at $12 million, we're talking $1,000 a foot. I don't even think the Trans-Alaska pipeline costs that much. That's a lot of money. And so, frankly, I think Cable has, they've inflated their budget. So, yeah, the engineer might correct me on that. But to me, these are just two ways to clean up the capital project. I don't want to see it get taken out.
So to be clear then, it's 6.6 million from one source, 9.8 from another, but it's for the same project. It's for the same pipe. We're talking about the pipe that runs through the Powder Ridge area, correct? Okay. Mr.
Actually, it's not Powder Ridge. It's Powder Hill.
Powder Reserve.
Powder Reserve.
Yeah. Mr. Dyson and Mr. Constant.
Mr. What's his name? So this has been in the comp plan for a long time, and the mayor, like most of us are thinking about it, realized we need to have lots more property available for present and future development. This one there also has some low-income, dense housing in it, which serves some benefits. There's also a couple other things. With the water supply that we have in the unionized part of town, we've had some pressure drops in the storage tanks. And part of this project is another storage tank up by the Mac Center, as I remember, and then more water supply. And all that back feeds also into our firefighting water capacity, those tanks. So there's another value that goes there. And as I understand it, and Bill or Mr. Mayor, you can correct me, but in the Northland, this North Anchorage Land Agreement, it was planning and foreseeing this development. And I understand from the property owner that they were told that they could go ahead with the platting and planning and so on and so forth with the assumption that there was water available. And as I understand it, they represented to me that they put $122 million into the plotting and the development and so on. And then kind of late in the game, they understood that, wait a minute, the city didn't have enough water for them there and for it. So that's got arrested on it. Then this methane gas settlement issue came up, and from the methane recovery from the land site, and the other named corporation, I think, said, Paul, wait a minute, we were supposed to get value from that development. And out of that settlement, I think, went $3 million to the pollutant, and $2 million of that's been withheld pending this going forward. I'm sure I got the details wrong, but the principle is there. So these folks are wanting to go ahead with this development. As Mr. Weldon pointed out in the work session you all had on this, everywhere else the utility builds the big pipes and the developer does the little pieces, just following that same pattern that we've already done. So what Mr. Dombosky is fixing there is keep this thing on the track that the comp plan and land use plan and commitments going forward as I understood it, we all understood it was. sooner rather than later. It's just restoring that, not doing something new.
So I'm going to ask a quick question. I'll go to Mr. Constantino's question, and then Mr. Weddleton. For AWU, I'm trying to remember what you said. So the $6.6 million in 2019, that's already in the budget for 2020. Is that what you're saying? Or
I'll let Steve talk to the capital program, but this $6.6 million is devoted to a different project.
Oh,
project
okay.
that takes place in East Anchorage between Burgaw and DeMar.
Oh, good.
We would, I think what this amendment does is displace that project with a project that we're not ready to build. Steve, do you want to talk a little more?
So Thunderbird Grandview is west of Burgaw, south of DeBar, north of Northern Lights. We call it Corrosion Alley. We've done several projects in there. There's a pipe that has more than 40% of its wall thickness left. It's in design right now. We're going to bid in 2019. Taking away and deleting the $6.6 million prevents me from being able to fund cert the bid and being able to go out to bid.
and that's different than, because we're also doing a storm drain under RECA.
Yeah,
It's
that's
a very
different.
similar area, though.
We've already done the water project on RECA many years ago, and we weren't ready coordinated with the storm drain. So
Okay.
But as I said in our parting on Friday, if you want to put a spike in there, I would rather have you just increase the appropriation. I'm not going to spend it in 2019. We're not ready there. We're not at the table yet to spend money in 2019. But if it makes a difference to appropriate the money and increase our total 2018 CIP budget, as long as it doesn't impact my net CIP, my programmatic, so the area under the curve is still the same, because that's my boundary in terms of my long-range financial plan, to make sure that we're not spending more than what we can realistically afford in terms of capital program. I'll even write the S version so you can lay it on the table so it's all correct for Tuesday.
Well, my version's not wrong, just so you know.
Well, if your intent is to only have it funded with state money, and that if the state money doesn't come through, it doesn't get billed.
My intent is to keep it on the list. I don't like it not being in the program. You have it in the program, but not over here. I want it on the list.
So you want it appropriated and in the budget, not the program.
I want it on the list.
It's on the list in our capital improvement program.
I want it in the budget.
She wants it appropriated.
That's what I'm saying.
And the way you have it written right now with state money or other money, we don't get any money from the state for this, so that's a nuance. We either have debt or equity funding. We can fix that.
You never know if you're going to get cleared.
Mr. Constant was in the queue, then Mr. Weddleton.
Thank you. So, kind of weird, we're back to work session for Friday 2.0, but I had a question on this topic. It might be a Mr. Paul's question. And I don't know where the negotiations have been, but have they offered to use the land as equity for their stake, where we put some kind of lien down on the land to provide the cash basis for us to make a transaction and we make this project go?
Who is they?
The owner of the land. And so this is kind of, because we're in the conversation, the part that I hear is the sticking point is people are trying to figure out how not to, I think AWW put it, end up with a big piece of land with a bunch of pipes through it that they can't do anything with. And so isn't the land of value, and can't that be used?
Well, they already have $2 million in collateral sitting in escrow, right?
Right.
And AWU is trying to shift the whole cost of the entire project to a single area and saying it's that. We're getting into the
Yeah, no, I agree there. I'm just curious if the question of a lien, an actual, the title interest on land has been discussed.
This is the kind of debate we can't have.
Substance.
I want to actually answer the question.
The answer to that question is no. We are meeting with later this month.
Okay.
Because that seems a real high value opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, now we have Mr. Weddleton in the queue, then you, Mr. Dyson.
I just want to make sure I got it right. So you do have a constraint. You can't add a project to say, oh, make that. It's like an AMAS. You have to be fiscally constrained, and you are by your expected rate.
We have a number of financial metrics that we guide ourselves by. Debt service coverage, ability to pay back, and incorporate within rates. There's multiple things. But in the long run, taking a look at our long-range financial plan, let's say over the next 6 years I can spend $250 million. Doesn't mean that I'm going to spend $50 million this year and $50 million next year, because the life cycle of projects means that I can go like this. as long as I don't exceed my programmatic plans. So I can have a spike in appropriation in 2019's capital budget to get this on the list. You can have that spike in appropriation, but I would reduce it in my out-year CIP, my 6-year program, to accommodate that spike. And then I have to, and Brett and my finance people have to balance that, which may mean that we have to borrow a little bit more money sooner than what we are anticipating to be able to afford actually constructing that project at that point in time that it's ready to construct.
Okay.
But appropriation, we don't technically need it right now because we're nowhere near construction. I already have appropriated money for design, but if it gets it on the table and on the books and a show of good faith and goodwill, that's fine.
Okay. Mr. Dyson and Mr. Croft.
Yeah. Somebody threw a figure around that you guys have in the bank on tens of millions of dollars for you or something. What's the proper way to say that? Is that unencumbered?
So we have operational budget reserve that is not able to be transferred over to a capital program. It's our operating reserve. I think it's at 112 days or something like that of operating reserve to be able to fund the utility operations as you get money, because you have expenses that can zoom up 1 month that don't necessarily cover what's coming in.
So the answer to my question is no.
No, it's not.
It's just an operating reserve.
Right.
All right. Thank you.
Mr. Croft.
Ms. Dombrowski asserted that you have artificially inflated the price of this project for whatever reason. Have you done that?
We have not artificially inflated it. What we have done is we've given order of magnitude estimates at this point in time for budgetary planning purposes. We still have to do more detailed design work that'll hopefully say X, but there's risks in this project because there are areas within the facility that have shallow water wells, and if we go through and construct in the area, we don't know what impact we will have to those residents that have shallow water wells. We are likely going to have to, depending on alignment, fully reconstruct roads. We anticipate there may be some soil contamination in the area from old heating fuel tanks and things like that. We don't know. So we've put that in there. It's about $1,000 a linear foot over, I think it's like 10,000 plus foot, plus other, we have to buy right of way from Eklutna to put the pipe through Eklutna's property unless they give it to us. We don't know what the scenario is going to be. So we've put in there a order of magnitude estimate. I am very hopeful that comes in significantly less. But if I don't program it in there and it comes in higher, then all of a sudden we're scrambling to go and kill off a project here or kill off a project there. It is not my intent to go and ballot Eklutna and the other homeowners with a $20 million price tag. We have work to do to get to a realistic ballot number.
And this should be in other than state, if it's going to be paid in the rate base in the normal way, even if it's a clean water fund or other source, it's going to be paid back with ratepayer money, it should be in other?
If you look at the way we present our budget, we have debt, grant, or equity. This would be a debt-funded project.
Other state, federal, or bonds?
We don't present our budget that way to you, at least I don't. I don't know what OMB does behind the curtain. But it's either going to, it should be a debt-funded project. Thank you.
Mr. Constant?
I think that Mr. Lassie would probably welcome your drafted version of an amendment that works for you, that works for her.
Well, it's not gonna work for them, but I think you understand what I'm saying.
We will put the money into 2019 CIB, as in boy, the budget, so you can appropriate it and show good faith effort to Eklutna that we're committed to being able to build this within all the other constraints that we have.
I appreciate that, Stephen.
Mr. Dyson.
So, my understanding is part of what we're doing right here is the developer will end up with a ICA interconnection agreement with the municipality or AWW out of this process.
This funding doesn't necessarily guarantee that that infrastructure cooperative agreement is going to happen. the vote that you had last year suggested that the appropriate funding mechanism would be through a water transmission improvement district. We've made tariff adjustments in coordination with to make sure that their needs were taken care of in our tariff to provide for this infrastructure coordination or cooperation agreement, which allows us to share the costs of infrastructure projects of this magnitude. We were principally looking at that tool for the sewer side because we thought that the water transmission improvement district was going to be the best approach for the water side. We have yet to come to an agreement with the FUTA as to how we actually need to go about doing this and where it's going to go.
Thank you. Mr. Buss, can we move on? So are we talking about 13 and 14 at the same time now, or is there something distinct about Amendment 14 we also need to talk about?
We were kind of talking about it too. I was just going to say, after this lively discussion we've had here today, if Stephen will write me up that other amendment, I will not move Amendment 13.
Will that, okay, so.
I'm still moving Amendment 14.
So Amendment 14 is a little different. Let's talk about that specifically now. I guess I want to ask first AWU's opinion on Amendment 14 specifically, and then we'll go from there.
It seems to me that the discussion is the same discussion as for 13. I think Steve's offered to help draft an amendment that accommodates the project could mean that we have one amendment instead of two that does the whole thing.
Okay. Mr. Bossy, any response to that? Great. Well, wonderful. That's exactly what we like to come out of work sessions, is we improve our amendments before they get to the floor. So, or perhaps we don't. So, let's go on to amendment number 15, Mr. Croft.
You know, both on this one and the next one, my intent was that I communicated Mr. Camacho and the administration on. I still think there are places in the operating budget where we are buying with operating funds capital assets. That's often mixed in with a lease for this purpose or operating for it. And I know there are restrictions on that. I think in SAP, where there was a mainframe purchase in other areas. So I sent a list of areas that are a mix. This amendment was the result, but I think I'm not going to offer 15 or 16 in their form, but it was sort of a notice that I'm going to have some kind of move true capital projects to the bond that I want to work some more with the administration to get ready.
You want to work with the administration in the next 4 days, or is this going to be like over the? Is there some way you could do this after we pass the budget? I mean, is there another point of entry for this concept?
Well, I mean, if I properly identify some, they have operational savings, operational risks too if the bond doesn't pass, but savings that allow us to fix some of the holes that we're talking about without overly stressing the snow removal or whatever. So I want to see if I can get a reliable number to bring to the body that says, I think we can move $1 million, which ain't going to kill the bond, but creates enough space to do some things people want to do.
Mr. Falsey, or anyone else from the administration, do you want to speak at all to these two amendments?
Yeah, we're having to work with any assembly member on whether or not these are bondable. We're looking at the list we received from Assembly Member Croft. I will say there is some risk in this process because if you pull it out of the capital budget, which we control, send it to the voters, you may get a yes from the voters, in which case all works out. You may get a no from voters, in which case you have necessary expenses that can't be paid for. So.
Good to know. Okay, is that it? I mean, is there any other?
I have a comment on it.
Go ahead, Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, thank you. So, when I served in this body literally 30 years ago, we had no staff to do anything. We had one person for 11 of us, no attorney, no accountant, and no research staff. It's delightful to come back and see that we've had that. And having our own sources of legal advice and accounting type information gives us some independence that was marvelous. We had no committee structure and about, well, hardly any meetings except the session. You all have approved this, I think we're spending too much money and time on our own budget. And I would suggest, as we hard-nose the administration about cutting costs and so on, that we look at our own house. And my respectful recommendation is that we quit having meetings just because we got them scheduled. We have them more on an ad hoc business. Economic and regional affairs and the liquor marijuana business, I don't know how you guys get by on it. Some of those we've got to do. And our little kingdom that has the ombudsman, all these licensing things, and the elections, they're probably close to being appropriately manned. But I think we ought to look at our staffed. Back to my misogynist label, right? But I think we ought to think very seriously about streamlining our own business. I love you guys, but I'm sick and tired of going to meetings with you. And we need to be really careful of the staff's time, particularly administration. Many of them have most of them have better things to do to sit around here in case we might ask a question. So that's a respectful suggestion. I'm not going to offer it. I would encourage some of you who have been here longer and maybe have a better perspective, probably do, should have, including Mr. Trainee, that we look at our own house. And I would bet for the size of a city we are, we're pretty high on what it costs for the city councils. End of discussion.
I don't think so.
We're way under.
Our salaries, well, anyway.
Those are the offices.
Depends on, I think it very much depends on the sort of state and the city. But, okay. But your overall point, I think, is well taken. Fred, it's good to hear that you enjoy our company so much. Is there anyone else, any other comments? I think that's all the amendments we have. We have time for audience participation. If anyone would like, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Peterson.
One last comment on the renaming of Lois Drive to Lois Lane. I actually used to live on Lois Drive for 7 years when I first moved to Anchorage, and about 35 years ago, people in the neighborhood decided they were going to switch, or try to switch the name of that street to Lois Lane, and they went around with a petition and were unsuccessful in getting anywhere near close to 50% of the people signed up to switch to Lois Lane. So that might be a little harder change than what people might anticipate.
For shame. Okay. Anyone else? Any audience participation before we go? Please identify yourself for the record. You'll have 3 minutes.
My name is Eugene Klein. I hope the boss can hear me while she's talking. I live in Mexican Valley. I follow the public crossing center appropriately. Decision made by the governing bodies more likely in public interest. With respect to the order of the room, it's difficult to talk with other Assembly members in the back directing what's going there. So I'll be brief. You can repeat my comments I said the other day. In regard to this, you closed public hearings on the budget. You're now into amendments. I heard the scenario laid on the table. A staff member is going to be writing something to you for Tuesday. This is the way to connect with the people. Thanksgiving week is basically next week. I understand after the last meeting, one Assembly member is not going to be present Tuesday because they'll be on the...
I'm calling.
Didn't you say you weren't going to be here
I'm calling
Tuesday?
in though. I'll be there. I'll be there.
Physically, you won't be here. Okay?
That's true.
Not teleconferencing is different. That scenario is showing non-respect for the public, non-respect for you to be present. I also couldn't have the notices at this meeting. We were losing Assembly members, not even at this meeting. And a note to this thing, connecting with the people. The budget is one of the top 2 decisions you have to make as a governing body. I strongly encourage you to stop these meetings where you have them here. Have them where you have your normal regular Assembly meetings. Have a video I take, because there's an extensive amount of information that was sent here by the administration, by staff in this budget season, and it would have been really great for the public to hear this situation of how this dialogue that you're saying here, with the flowers or whatever, the public is blind to this scenario. And these audio tapes are not going to be an answer to clearly show what's going on with you and what happened, why you came to the direction of Tuesday night when you're dealing with the budget. And then I guess my time, where's my phone? I stopped the clock, so I better stop right now because I'm not sure where I ended with respect to the time.
Thank you, Mr. Haber.
Thank you. That's all. Oh, just one footnote. When you close public hearings, you said disclosure at that regular meeting. You said, well, the public has a chance to send the comments in, and so you can still have a chance to hear from the public. With all due respect, these amendments, how they've been handed out to the public, this is a big, what we call a big surprise. Everyone's going to be probably running around the city saying, oh, God, we better get there Tuesday. But how can they ever address it? Because there's no place for the public to speak on that. The annual meeting, unless you run the clock and prevent human people to address it there. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haber. This work session is closed.